right, guys, I'm Don Ford. This is Progressive Insider. We're here today to introduce a new host to the show. We have J. Brandon Johnson here with us today. J. Brandon Johnson, how are you? Should I call you Jay or JBJ?
Brandon is great. The only reason why I go by Brandon is my dad's first name. My dad and I share the same first name. So growing up, he was an attorney, and we would get calls to the house all the time. And when they would either ask to speak to, Big Joseph or Little Joseph, which is my first name. So my mom called me Brandon. My dad went by Joseph, and I've just gone by that my whole life.
I feel like we're gonna end up calling you JB before this is over.
Yeah, well, that happens too.
Just heads up on that. Just kind of hit me. I was like, I'm way too busy to think about all that, so we're just gonna go with JB for now. No, Brandon, it's great to have you. It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here. You are based out of just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. And you do something a little unusual. You wouldn't think from the South.
I farm hemp. I farm cannabis in a little town right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. So I live here, on the farm. And before, the pandemic hit, I was commuting back and forth to Durham, where I edit videos for Duke University for their academic media production team. But since the pandemic hit, I've been at home just like everybody else, and now I telecommute. So I live on the farm and I edit here, and yeah, it's actually been pretty nice being able to do that.
I had a great moment on my last little road trip I went on, where I ended up in like Minnesota or somewhere on a kind of famous Indian reservation, and they had been growing hemp for a year already. They were the first places to get legal hemp. And that was standing in giant stalks of it, just huge to the ceiling. And I think I cried. I don't know. I think there's an Instagram video of me crying, because I've been for many, many years, I have been a big, I like saying, I've been a big pusher of legal hemp and legal weed. It was a big deal here in Los Angeles when we got legal marijuana through. And you're dealing with the first examples of legal hemp. Is that right? Because this is about CBD oil, yes. And you're not actually growing the marijuana flower so much as you are refining the product for the CBD oil.
Yeah, we actually are multifaceted in that we can do both, because basically the CBD oil exists within the flower. So depending on how the market looks, we may, trim for flower, because there's a lot of people down here, who came off of big tobacco, and they still want to have that same relaxing drag and whatnot, and hemp provides that, as well as other medicinal qualities that tobacco did not provide. Tobacco used to be the biggest agricultural product here in the state until the Chinese tariffs kicked in. China was one of the biggest consumers of our tobacco, so a lot of farmers switched over to that. So basically they switched over to hemp because they were trying to find some way to cover that gap, and a lot of tobacco consumers.
You're talking about really recently, like this just happened. Like Trump put tariffs on Chinese, so they couldn't get our tobacco. It was more of a tax on it, basically. And so the tobacco farmers now had no one to buy their tobacco, so they rotated over. And this is all happening very, very quickly.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's already happened, out west in regard to the introduction of cannabis into the economy. We don't have the THC version that's legal here, but people could read the lay of the land and see what's going on in states like Oregon and Washington and California and Colorado. So it was a no-brainer. So when the Farm Bill passed, hemp was made legal nationwide. So
oops on that. They were just like, oh yeah, by the way, we made hemp legal.
Yes.
And you're like, wait, I'm sorry. Were you specific between hemp and marijuana? And they were like, not really.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Exactly.
It's like Trump with this. We're dealing with Trump giving us like a quarter of Medicare for all. There's like no definition if we're going to get treatment for just COVID or payment for treatment for anything you go to the hospital for right now.
Exactly.
So it's not clearly defined. And frankly, I really enjoy when the federal government does not define these types of laws. So this has been a big benefit to you and your community bouncing back from the tariffs against tobacco, I see.
Yeah, it's been amazing. So we started farming for flower, because flower was more lucrative at the time. The one issue was the law enforcement here in the state has had issues determining the difference between legal cannabis and illegal cannabis. And unless you send cannabis flower off to get tested, you can't distinguish between the two. They smell the same, they look the same, they feel the same, they burn the same.
Americans are learning a lot about lab testing right now because everyone's learning about their COVID tests or getting genome sequenced for 5 days. And it's a similar thing with marijuana and hemp to determine the difference. So you're talking about the profit loss and gain scenario and what's available for police officers to actually come out and check the difference between these two types of situations because it's so expensive to do it. It is beyond the purpose of like the taxation at the end of the day.
Exactly. And so it's become really, well, growing for flower, you know, is still expensive, but it's not tenable to grow for oil because not only do you have to grow for flower, after your flower has been cured and everything, you have to send it off to be, you know, pressed down into oil. So we can do that too. It's just an extra step. But the flower market has been under siege because of those regulations in regard to law enforcement and their inability to distinguish the difference. There's no field testing for it. So that's where I started seeing, you know, growing hemp is not just being something, you know, that could be used, you know, for your livelihood, but there's also a political component. You can't grow hemp and not be involved in what's going on in regard to politics and this new age prohibition that we have around this plant.
I've actually seen this before. I saw this in Oregon and Washington when it was first going, where farmers were getting, because it's really important to distinguish them as farmers, because that's what they are. They were, you know, the local ordinances were shifting depending on how conservative, like the state might be Democratic, but your rural areas where most of these farming operations were happening they're more conservative. So it was they got really involved with their local governments, and this is where you can't get involved with this without being political. It's like the community activism triangle I talk about between how it all comes together. And you sort of, by getting involved with something like this, because of this new age prohibition, great phrasing, by the way. That was really.
And there's I mean, with this new age prohibition, you know, we're dealing with all the obstacles that, you know, alcohol, you know, dealt with back in the day. But then we also have opponents, you know, who are already embedded within state and federal government who don't want us to be successful because we undermine their bottom line. Alcohol is one of them. Tobacco is another. The pharmaceutical industry, because this plant is so versatile in its applications that it threatens multiple markets. So that's one of the main reasons why we've had an issue with, you know, getting this plant legalized here in the Bible Belt South.
You know, I found there's an interesting way you just looked at that, where you said that they don't want to share the markets, which I think is true. That's true, but I don't feel like that ends up being the underlying issue at the end of the day, and I might give you a head start on this. The thing is, they don't want to have to give you a seat at the table.
True.
So like that, so we see that market thing. Their market share isn't going to shift that much. If anything, people are going to probably spend more on that stuff when it goes legal. They feel like when it comes to deciding legislation, influence on the government, suddenly there's going to be this other group that they have to be concerned about. And that really is more the issue. That's more about why they shut the people out, because the people aren't like a refined group in the first place, right? We're all over the place. And that's where the movement has been very successful at negotiating different rules along the way, the movement for change around Bernie Sanders, because we come as like a group. And it's easier to say, like, we're going to negotiate as a group in some level or another. And I think that's where we talk about why they cut the people out of the process. It's just because we're a million people asking for different things. And then just, I kind of get it, but they don't want to give you the seat at the table. You shouldn't get involved with politics, by the way, just as a disclaimer. You shouldn't get involved with politics if you don't want to deal with people's shit. So anyway, So yeah, so you have these opponents already. They don't want to give you a seat at the table. And what would you do with the seat at the table? Like, what would happen from that point?
Well, one of the main things, and you're very correct, Don, in that, you know, they don't want to give a seat at the table, and it's not just because of, you know, the money that is available to go around, because there's billions and billions of dollars in this industry in regard to the application of this plant. It's also because you would be given a seat at the table to a lot of individuals that you persecuted thus far. For instance, the prison industrial complex You know, that revolving door, that school to prison pipeline exists in part because of marijuana prohibition. A lot of individuals end up with a charge and then they can't get another job, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. So they go back out there and they legally try to do what they were good at. And so it's been a very, very, the war on drugs that Nixon started has been very, very effective in incarcerating a large amount of individuals who have a lot of knowledge behind bars. And out in California, they've started to release people and expunge nonviolent offenders records who are affiliated with this plant. If something like that happens down here in the South, that's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna be able to vote again. That's gonna be a lot of people who are going to be able to start up their own businesses and compete with this industry. What we're seeing more often than not around here is an increase in regard to the entry point in regard to getting to this market. You can't just start with one plant in your home. You have to get a grow license. Initially, the grow licenses were relatively cheap, but as this industry has grown and as people with money have been able to secure their own lobbyists and whatnot, they've changed laws and made it more difficult for individuals to get in by raising those annual fees that have to be paid. So some people believe that right now it's the wild, wild west, and eventually the industrial market will come in and none of us will be able to make any money who are at this lower level. But ideally, I would love for us to all to partner together in a socialist paradigm where we can all unionize, if you will, and push back against big cannabis.
Yeah, you're going to have to become big cannabis. There's no way around it. You're going to have to become big. And the thing is that this is where little cannabis, what you're talking about, gets wiped out by big cannabis. And it's what we're always fighting here in California. Every time they're passing a new ballot or something like that, it's big cannabis. They're trying to create big cannabis. Yeah. And so what you have to do is basically get everyone together and do a co-op thing, like way ahead of anyone thinking or talking about it, between all the legal people. Yeah. And then try to actually figure out how to throw in for a larger investment somewhere, like a larger legal, you know what I'm trying to say?
Exactly.
Like a massive scale. And then you have to define how that scale works. Yeah. And then when you have to be as big business, and then you get to be big business. It's really about tax revenue at the end of the day. Like how much ground you can cover, how much of a building you're going to buy, how much you can put into construction. It really comes down to that. And this is where we're dealing with the Bernie campaign again. Yeah. You're a Bernie person, and we're trying to fight this, the unlimited money in politics, and we have to put a lot of money into politics, very, very carefully and specifically, in order to get past that. But you said a lot of interesting things in there, by the way, besides the direct response. So you really, by the way, because the political aspect is really, really important. Because I've been talking about this, and we just did the interview with Mustafa Ali, Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali.
True. Oh, the great interview, by the way.
What's that?
That was a great interview, by the way.
Oh, thank you. No, it was. Carrie didn't even tell me how big of a deal he was. She knows I don't do any research before I interview people because it's like discovery. Maybe it works for me. Maybe I look like a fool. I can't tell. Point is that we talked about this concept, and it's something that I refer to, and I think he liked the term, generational suppression. And the prison system is generational suppression. They're not just trying to suppress an individual, they're trying to suppress generations of an individual. So that, like, they want you to have children young. This is specifically people of color, I've noticed. And this, I'm not going to say anything that other people haven't said, so feel free to edit this out to be like, I can't believe him. But the theme's like, it's, children young, lots of pressure, turn to crime, a dad's in jail, a young person is, mom is overworked, dad is gone, son is 2 year, 4 year, 6 years from being in the prison system themselves. Yeah. And that's the school to prison pipeline. And what you talked about is how legal marijuana has been a major tool to accomplish, illegal marijuana, the war on drugs. It's been a major tool to make this happen. And we can't not talk about this because this is another form of racial injustice. And we can't, like, you're doing this, and there are people probably not that far from you in jail for illegal marijuana. Yep. I'm sure. So we have to have that conversation about. Man, I got a little off track just thinking about how terrible it is.
But I want to take it, but I want to take it away
Oh,
from you because you started down a path that I wanted it to that I wanted to travel myself.
I remember real fast. I just want to say, it was just about how we're dealing with. Oh no, fuck it. Just go. Just we're gonna edit this. We're gonna edit this. Fine.
No, it's all good.
3139. No, wait. 3139 needs an edit. Carrie, mark it, please.
Gotcha. But no, you're right. You know, there are multifaceted angles to this story, and one of the big things that drew me into wanting to grow cannabis was the fact that I knew a lot of people, you know, who had been caught up in that school to prison pipeline, and on top of that, I also found out that basically some of these larger tobacco companies, these larger companies that had more seed money, they were basically leasing inmates, you know, who had been locked up for cannabis-related charges, and basically taking them out and using them, you know, in their fields. Because the one thing about this plant, and the main reason why tobacco can't pivot to dominate in this industry, in spite of all the money it's acquired over the years, is the fact that this plant requires, you know, person to plant interaction daily. Like I have to interact with all my plants, you know, every day, whether they're seedlings or whether, you know,
there's a reason they get called the ladies.
Yeah, and they're all, I call them, they're called the ladies because every single plant that produces flower is female. The males don't produce flower. So
and they need your daily attention.
And it needs they all need my daily attention. So it appeals to my vanity. But yeah, you know, I digress. So they can't, the tobacco industry, you know, couldn't just, you know, plant these plants and then just roll a combine through the fields and harvest them and, you know, boom, instant revenue. That's not how it works, you know. So they needed to have, and that's one of the main reasons why cannabis was popular, you know, a popular cash crop, you know, in the South all the way up until after the Civil War and whatnot, was because of the fact that there was a bunch of free slave labor that could work it. So cotton wasn't the only king in the South, you know, cannabis was a king too, as well as tobacco.
Yeah, somehow that gets left out of the history books.
Yeah, just left it out the history books, you know, altogether. But yeah, you know, in, you know, 60s, 70s, you know, Nixon saw an opportunity to persecute, you know, both blacks and whites in the civil rights movement, you know, who were working together to, you know, upend his reign over this country. And, you know, he said, you know, I see that they both consume, you know, that devil's weed. And that was basically the end of it. And there's numerous stories out there about it. But yeah, I mean, the war on drugs was started in part to basically persecute people of color and, you know, progressives.
Didn't it align with the, I'm not going to use any other language, right? Because I didn't think about this. But I did no research on this. We're just here. The civil rights movement was happening at the same time. And it aligns with the civil rights movement happening and like, black people getting the access to vote, and then it was just a little bit later that Nixon, that was like the response to it. They couldn't get rid of this, so they came up with this.
Exactly. The Vietnam era, you know, the civil rights movement was in full swing around the Vietnam era, and yeah, Nixon saw that was a way to harass, you know, dissidents to the Vietnam War.
We have like letters and things like that. I feel like I've actually heard like a recording of Nixon saying this specifically. Like, we're not saying this like a joke. Like, I feel like I've actually heard Nixon. We should really, it's just one of those things.
Yeah, anyways, Nixon was racist as shit. And he saw
well, every white person was racist as shit. That was just how
I think there were levels of racism. I think there were levels of racism.
But I you know what, I've ended up in some bad places growing up. You know, there was at least one time where I was just hanging out with these girls, and I go to their house, they're gonna have a party, and I'm like, why does everyone here have a shaved head? Like that actually happened.
You didn't get the memo? You didn't get the memo?
No, I didn't. And the funny thing was, the clearest example of gay behavior I'd ever seen in my whole life, and still since lived in West Hollywood, was one of the guys running around grabbing everyone's balls. I swear to God, it was a skinhead party, and like the coolest dude was like ball checking everyone all the time. It was really a real experience, and I was like, I should go, mostly because I don't want to get fondled, and you're all skinheads. Like, why am I here?
Skinheads flirt weird. Skinheads flirt weird.
Yeah, it is weird. So you know, it's just racist and weird. So I'm not into that. That's right. Weird, maybe. So, but I think you're making a really good point in there that I was trying to round about too, but there's so much to talk to in this that it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that we glossed over is that Republicans will lose if these charges against people get dropped.
Exactly, exactly.
And
But we
that's
see it
why
down
it's
in
moving
Florida.
so
That's why I try
slow.
to stop in Florida.
Right. That's why it's moving so slow. Well, actually, you heard the last, you know, where the last step in Florida is they finally said they can't stop people from voting.
Yeah.
Like a week after the primary happens, of course.
And then now we have COVID, so like, you know, they can't stop people from voting, but the fear of dying will definitely stop you from voting.
You know, especially when you're dealing with this is overwhelmingly affecting black men.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we've been trying to talk about because, again, this is another super sensitive subject.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, people are dying. So we need to talk about it. We need to address the issue. So I got a question for you. I talked about this a little bit with Dr. Ali.
Mm-hmm.
And we were discussing the psychological, because there's all kinds of underlying health issues. People have asthma they don't know about. There's all kinds of discrimination with the air quality and water quality that plays a major factor. But I'm wondering about the psychological impact of treating your symptoms. And I'm wondering about how, what a young black man culture, how people are taught to handle when you get a cold or get sick or do any of that stuff. Because I know even in like, you know, for me, it's kind of 50-50, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have a ton. I was sick all the time. It's kind of, anyways, we don't need to get into that. But the point is that, you know, lots of people get lots of training. I feel like they're more likely to treat their symptoms. I'm just curious. I don't know. I'm stabbing the dark.
Of the people of color, you know, in regard those who subscribe to the old, you know, black remedy model of, you know, medicine, you know, you're seeing an opportunity for disinformation on an epic level now. You know, I have a friend who's talked about, you know, apple cider vinegar. Yeah, I'm not saying none of these things, you know, are ineffective. I'm just trying to say, you know, there's a lot of people looking to, you know, old grandma remedies to help address it, to calm themselves, in my opinion, to feel as if they have some sort of control. Because, you know, one of the main reasons why a lot of, you know, people of color are dying from this, and Professor Ali, you know, Dr. Ali talked about this, you know, in your interview, is the fact that, you know, they're at risk due to the environments, you know, due to, you know, poor air quality, you know, where they live, you know, due to being exposed to, you know, poor water, due to not having access to, you know, healthy food because they live in food deserts and everything, you know, that they can
desert. That was new for me.
Exactly.
You know what? You shined a light on something that's really important, and I'm gonna do something differently because of it, because I think it's almost inappropriate. I mean, I think I'm addressing an issue that needs to be talked about, but it is not a bigger issue. Then we can address that a different way by really addressing that they need to treat their symptoms very aggressively with real, not your grandma's remedies, actual remedies, get your zinc kind of vibe. But I think you're bringing up a real important issue, that talking about it any other way, because people are very simple at the end of the day. Like, they don't handle these situations in really complicated manner. Being like, this is an environmental thing.
Yeah.
And just saying that to people, and they go, well, what do you mean? Well, they're dealing with lesser air quality. They're dealing with lesser water quality. These issues make you more susceptible. And they're going to try to find situations where it's not like that. And then we can get into psychological stuff with whatever I'm talking about. But generally speaking, it seems like addressing it any other way is just going to confuse people and take away.
Yeah. And then, you can look at it from, you know, a poverty perspective too. You know, a lot of people of, you know, color, you know, don't live in your urban areas, especially don't live, you know, in areas where, you know, the educational system, you know, has been cared for. If you're living in Southside Chicago, you know, then yeah, you're not going to have access to the kind of education that's going to tell you, you know, here's how your body works. Here's how many nutrients, you know, you need to take in. Here's the kind of exercise you need to have or whatever. Like, and you're probably just trying to live, you know, day to day, you know, your family's living paycheck, you know, to paycheck. And that's another vector too. You know, if I can't afford to stay home, you know, for inordinate amounts of time because I have a job that has to pay for my rent, my apartment, you know, my car note, whatever. And so I'm going to have to go out there. I'm going to have to expose myself, and, you know, common sense. More exposure means, you know, a greater likelihood of you contracting, COVID-19. So there is an intersection of a lot of, there's some genetic stuff too as well. Hypertension is something that's more prevalent among African American males. So there's a lot of factors contributing to that increased number
They
in
become
mortality
like
rate.
they become that pre-existing condition, that thing that skips phases and does whatever, or the phase that you need to might go ignored. There's just a
Exactly.
lot of really, and the education level we're dealing with, and that's not a people of color thing. The
No, it's not.
education
No,
thing,
no.
this
It's all
is a
systemic.
nationwide thing. It's
Yeah,
a nationwide. The whole
yeah. And poor, poor people. Poor people who are white, poor people who are Native American, poor people who are Hispanic or whatever. You're going to see an increased mortality rate with them, as well, an increased contraction rate with them as well. So it's not something that's exclusive to the Black community, which is why I really like, Sanders' approach. Like, there's been a lot of pushback, with Sanders, in regard to, how he approaches race and why he won't talk about race and why he won't do something for the Black people, and the Black people need this and we need to do that for the Black people, and Black be Black, Black, Black. When in reality, it's not, a racial issue first and foremost. It's a poverty issue first and foremost. It's a class issue, first and foremost. And injecting race, is very, very divisive. And
Well, you're
so,
talking about limiting your ability to grow a majority, right?
exactly.
You need a 50% majority plus one to win basically anything. And if you're fighting the establishment, you actually need like a 65% majority. You got to get a lot. And so when
Exactly.
you make it about race, you instantly divide where, well, that's not my problem. That's
Yeah.
like me saying your problem isn't my problem. But when we call it a poverty problem, we call it a social economic problem or a class issue, then we can see each other from a relatable point. And that's where independents become the largest voting bloc. And that's where the people who don't vote are the largest voting bloc. And that's where these things happen, but we still have to figure out a way to like bring those people together. And as we know, the media and all these other sources, we're here, we are Progressive Insider, trying to get in the midst of this and counter it, because we kind of got to open these wounds up that have healed wrong and get in and discuss them incorrectly, but in an atmosphere where we listen to each other and then come out saying, you know what, I'm not going to discuss it this way because that's not how we're going to heal this the best.
And once you start playing that game, then it becomes, you basically lay out a landmine field that you have to, tiptoe through. And now Bernie needs to bring on a Black surrogate because he said something wrong. And this Black surrogate has got to be recognized in the community and lead everybody, toward, the right answer that's, politically correct and doesn't offend everybody. But now I pissed off the Black gay population because I didn't say this right. And, and so then it becomes this whole identity politics, song and dance. And meanwhile, you have people on the other side who are all unilaterally minded. They have solidarity, and that's the issue that the left has had to wrestle with, is trying to accommodate all of these different narratives and weave them together and make sure everybody feels like they're being taken care of.
It almost feels
the
like
vocabulary.
Right, exactly, with their vocabulary. And it almost feels like there are so many groups, and I want to relate them to the 5G crowd right now. Yeah. We all know who they are, and they were saying 5G beforehand, and now they're saying, well, whatever coronavirus is caused by, it's my thing. So they're trying to figure out 5G is created by their thing. And I feel like it's sort of similar in the fact that we have these people drawing these divisive lines over language all the time. And no one, it's so hard. I don't know how much promotion you've done, but it's so hard, probably a bunch, to get a message out to like everyone. Like, I live stream all day and people still ask me the same questions I'm answering my live streams.
Yeah.
So, where was I going with that? I got a little distracted thinking about my cat in my lap. Sorry. So it's kind of like how people always compare these issues to their thing and relate it to whatever their thing was. And so when we're dealing with these people using this divisive language, they jump in when they see people coming together using broad terminology, and then they demand specific language that you can't give in these broad terminology moments. Like, someone actually went through and took apart all of BLM's demands, Black Lives Matters, to that's their general demands for reparations, I think is what it was. And somebody went through and broke down Bernie's plan point by point to show that it actually met all 24 points of it. Just people weren't getting their language. So I think it's similar how people are just in this, like, they want to control, like you said earlier about people want to feel like something's working. They want to feel like they have control over their situation.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing these people injecting themselves to have control over it. And just stopping that is very hard.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest, issues I've had, when I get into, pretty heated arguments on social media with Black moderates, because a lot of them are older. They come from the civil rights movement. They come from a period where they walked in solidarity behind individuals like Dr. Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael, and they believe that we should all just fall in, rank and file behind them, and do what the elders have said.
Clyburn endorsed him. What is wrong with you?
Exactly. So to buck somebody like Clyburn, you aren't respecting your roots. You aren't true Black. You don't care about your people, and then that becomes the argument. Instead of us talking about issues, it's about why aren't you supporting Black? And then and I've had numerous conversations. I have 2 daughters who are half white. My sons are 1/4 Native American. So with that being the case, it's hard for me to say, I'm only going to endorse the Black parts of them. Everything else is irrelevant. We're trying to advance, this country, this world, and we're using these broken constructs to define us to the point of division. And those division points are exploited by the other side because they can see the trigger points. They can see the language that's being used and how it upsets individuals, and they just hop in and they screen capture, they take that dialogue, and they use it aggressively, offensively when it comes to election time. James Clyburn said this, Brandon Johnson said that. Is he a real Black? He doesn't care about Black people. And the next thing you know, your whole movement's divided because you were locked and loaded in regard to having to use this language to describe everything. And their movement is moving forward in solidarity as they discuss and talk about shithole countries. They can be as racist as they want to be. All they have to do is just point out one iota or suggest one instance where racism might have happened, and suddenly a whole candidate's campaign is imploded. That's how fragile this construct is, and that's how divisive and destructive it is whenever you adhere to it and don't allow any margin for error.
Wow, I think that's actually the real statement at the end of this, like allowing margin for error. And so we've gotten into this society, and we can actually thank the Karens of the world for this.
Exactly.
If that's a derogatory term, it's still safe to use or not. We're going to have to bleep that out pretty soon. But it comes down to political correctness when we actually create a new type of racism.
Yeah.
I think that it comes down to, I was having this talk a lot with people a couple years back about how by ignoring race, you actually create a new type of racism because you're ignoring the plight of people of color, which is different. I mean, you can't say that my experience as a white person is going to be the same as a Black person's in any aspect or tone. I mean, I have actually dealt with the cops with a Black friend before, and let's just say it was like, it was literally like the Dave Chappelle skit. The guy, I'm literally talking trash to the cops the whole time, and he's like, dude, shut the fuck up. And I'm like, why? They work for me. Fuck this. And so he was like, I can't even.
Yeah, so, no, it's real. It's real.
It's
real.
Super real. So it's important that we get that voice. And this is why I'm looking forward to having you on here, because the last thing we want is to be just the Don Ford show. Literally the last thing we want. So I'm really looking forward to bringing you on. Of course, we only bring on Brandons, apparently, because I am technically a Brandon and you're a Brandon. So now that we have our 2 Brandons, Carrie, please, no more Brandons. That's just going to be for
We reach our Brandon quota. We've reached our Brandon quota.
Yeah. Unless he's like Chinese or something. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. But this is just nice to meet you, Brandon. It's super, super awesome. And I think we're getting a good sense out of what kind of show we're looking at out of you. Yeah. We're talking about marijuana. We're talking about civil rights. We're talking about cutting through the bullshit. You really sound a lot like something that I would watch. So that's kind of exciting. So cool. Why don't you just share from your voice what you are thinking about doing? What kind of like interviews, maybe just, your turn.
Interviews, and primarily I want to continue the work that I began in 2016 with the digital liberation, front. And so I anticipate there'll probably be a show that is that's an extension, of that concept. It still exists online, on Facebook, we chat, and talk every day. But yeah, like, I want to start local movements. I want to build the local news. A lot of local news outlets have either been bought up by larger media conglomerates, or they're closing because they aren't making the revenue they used to make. So with that being said, there's a lot of larger media outlets that are forwarding their agendas at local levels now. And there's a few news articles you can look at online that basically flesh that out that much more. But that being said, we can't rely on someone, in a castle, states away, to tell us what's going on the ground where we live right now. And it's harder to tell your neighbor their fake news than it is to tell, someone, a talking head from Fox or CNN. And so if we're going to affect any kind of meaningful change at this point, it's going to have to be just like Bernie's movement, from the ground up, just like the progressive movement from the ground up. We've got to move like that. So I hope to run a platform, have a show and help with shows, like yours, where, I'm doing interviews that give a local perspective to global problems.
They say all politics is local. I think you're really trying to isolate that point in our media, because all politics is local. Not my politics. All my politics are all national. But if you look at it, right, the way I look at it is that my local is America. And that's my American politics affect world politics. So because I'm in Los Angeles, so doing local politics here is like, it looks like getting in line in LA looks like the voting in Wisconsin right now.
True.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to it. We don't have a name, we don't have anything yet, but we're going to work it out, and it's going to be really exciting. So, I think that's it for us. Right now, we're trying to get people on our Patreon. I really hope that you will take a look at that. We're setting up a Discord channel that I'm going to be sitting in all the time, so you can come talk to me. We're going to start limiting a little bit of access to me on Facebook. I'll be moving behind the Progressive Insider group, posting more on there. My live stream also going to be moving to there. I'm hoping Brandon will write some posts. I heard he makes jokes. So I want to see some of those jokes. And there's a lot of news happening very, very quickly. So we're gonna put that to the test and see what he's got. So I have been Don Ford. Hopefully still will be tomorrow. You never really know. That has been J. Brandon Johnson. Super excited again. This has been Progressive Insider. Carrie Barber is hiding out, but she doesn't want you to know that. So this has been us. This has been an introduction. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy what we have coming next.
Thank you, Don. Glad to be here.
Thank you.